FDA with private payers, sometimes with little to no sharing of information amongst the stakeholder groups. And oftentimes, reimbursement and managed market strategies are created in silos that don't take into account all of the commercial activities and programs and platforms operating across an organization. Certainly, we've seen regulatory organizations create REMS programs in a vacuum without input or collaboration with other internal stakeholder groups that create programs that touch those very same patients. So a few questions linger in my mind. What data is being collected across this entire continuum? What data can be collected tomorrow that isn't being collected today? What information will be valuable to payers tomorrow that we can begin to collect today? And how can we increase the overall value of our commercial programs to prepare ourselves for this movement towards real-world evidence? I'm going to talk for the next few minutes about 3 different types of programs and platforms currently used in the commercial and regulatory biopharmaceutical worlds that deserve some thought to how they could be transformed into more effective platforms and vehicles to that end goal of developing better evidence. The first and most obvious is the registry, and I won't spend too much time on this since Elise covered this in pretty fine detail, which is principally designed and implemented within the scope of an FDA-approved risk evaluation and mitigation strategy. Historically, registries were used as marketing tools, but we've all seen the obvious evolution of the registry towards a regulatory-focused tool. Interestingly, a recently published study in the Journal of Bone and Joint Surgery looked at 85,000 joint surgeries from 2001 to 2010. Incidentally, this is the nation's largest registry of implants. This prospective study concluded that these types of research projects could enhance patient safety and the quality of care by providing better outcomes and information to providers. Additionally, according to study lead author Elizabeth Paxton with Kaiser Permanente, quote, "The findings demonstrate the critical impact of registries and the important role they play in counseling patients, identifying risk factors, tracking implanted devices during recalls, and assessing comparative effectiveness of devices." Clearly, this study is a foundation for registries being used as a tool to demonstrate and encourage better outcomes. But the question remains, how can payers use this information to make more informed coverage decisions? Certainly, the fact that this study was sponsored within the payer community has implications for industry. Is this an increasing trend for payers to start developing their own data on outcomes and effectiveness? Certainly, the recent acquisition of health outcomes and clinical research firm United Biosource Corporation by pharmacy benefit manager Medco Health Solutions certainly makes one stop for a moment to consider that payers very well may begin to rely less on industry-sponsored data and more on data developed by the payer community and the federal government. Moving on to patient access programs, which typically take the form of a reimbursement or free drug program, also called a patient assistance or a PAP. A vast amount of data is collected in these types of programs on managed markets trends, such as prior authorization requirements, denial information, co-pays, and formulary tiers, all of which can be used by brands and managed markets teams to make more targeted and strategic reimbursement decisions. But the question in my mind is, can the environment of a free drug program be used to collect patient-reported outcomes? And also, what would some of the confounding factors involved be? And would there be concerns around study population bias? So I'd ask that Elise, as I continue to talk about this, think in her mind, and also the audience as we go into our panel session about some of these questions that I'm posing. These programs have primarily been used as marketing and PR tools, but as industry looks for ways to streamline and reduce overall operating costs, transforming a free drug program into a data collection platform is certainly a way to add value to what is traditionally a cost center to a pharmaceutical manufacturer. And are there ways to integrate data collected through a free drug program into late-phase clinical and outcome studies? And again, I'll be interested to hear your thoughts during the question and answer period on this topic. Last but not least, adherence programs are certainly a hot topic these days. Traditionally, adherence programs have been administered by a third party through an opt-out model, or perhaps through a specialty pharmacy's high-touch case management approach. Typically, an opt-out program works by analyzing claims data from partner pharmacies and pharmacy networks and communicating targeted clinical and wellness messages to patients in a variety of forms, such as a letter, an email, or perhaps a text message. Most of these programs don't really focus on collecting patient-reported outcomes today, as they measure success in how well a patient stays compliant with therapy and the additional revenue generated by these additional scripts. But this is an obvious platform for data collection from patients. A targeted program could collect specific lab results or quality of life information from a patient at designated time points throughout the program that could be integrated into a late phase study or perhaps an ARC-sponsored study. On the other hand, specialty pharmacies have been collecting this type of information for years, focusing on increasing compliance and persistency to demonstrate overall value of this specialty pharmacy model to their payer clients. These programs are typically considered highly interventional and are aimed at changing the patient's behavior by requiring conversations with the patient in order to refill their prescription. These programs have been collecting quality of life information both for payers and for industry for years. But the question really remains is what exactly has industry done with this information that they're purchasing from specialty pharmacies on quality of life and other data points? And how are they integrating this information into their value propositions? I'd be very interested to hear from some of the folks on the industry side in the audience that perhaps work in reimbursement or managed markets to how they're working with brands with this type of information. Another question that remains is how willing will patients contacted through one of these opt-out models be willing to answer questionnaires, and will the response rate be great enough to have a large enough study sample population to base coverage decisions on? As you can see in these slides provided by courtesy of my friends over at Diplomat Specialty Pharmacy, many different types of tools are being utilized by registered nurses in these adherence programs to collect patient-reported outcomes and measure the effectiveness of specialty therapies. Additionally, the tools are measuring various types of outcomes, such as daily average consumption and medication drop-off rate. In this sample specialty pharmacy administered adherence program, many data points obviously are being collected that help demonstrate to both payers and industry why a patient discontinues therapy and various types of patient behavior that can influence their overall outcomes. These types of programs are definitely valuable to payers to identify trends in utilization, as well as by manufacturers to improve the data behind their value claims through publications and targeted messaging to payers. As you can see in this slide here, the average MS patient in the US has a 54% adherence rate, but through a specialty pharmacy adherence program, the patient's adherence rate increases to over 96%. So obviously there is a considerable amount of value to the programs, both in terms of outcomes as well as the information they collect. So some final thoughts as I wrap up. Certainly free drug programs have the potential to offer a captive study population for patient-reported outcomes at little cost to industry. The challenge will be to figure out how to overcome study population bias and other confounding factors. These retail pharmacy-based adherence programs using enhanced communication mechanisms such as technology, emails, and text messages can be a key component in reaching the most patients with the least effort. Certainly, groups like ARC, NIH, Euroqual, and other organizations are hard at work adapting existing patient-reported outcomes instruments for the next generation of evidence-based medicine. And definitely last but not least, collaboration and communication with the private payer sector is absolutely critical, as is developing solutions with various national and state HIT coordinating councils. I think as one of the last questions that I have is how can evidence-based medicine be used more effectively by providers? If you're more interested in that particular topic, I suggest reading the paper written by Richard Saver. He's a professor at the University of North Carolina School of Law, entitled Healthcare Reform's Wild Card, the Uncertain Effectiveness of Comparative Effectiveness Research. It's a great resource to understand CER and the challenges facing both its implementation and adoption. If you have any questions after the panel, my colleagues at inVentiv Clinical Communications advance insights and patient outcomes